Kathy Goddardam needs no introduction from the podium. This is her program. Let's welcome Kathy.
Thank you, Jack. Can I pull this down some, as tall as you are? As many of you know, GSE stands for Group Study Exchange. GSE was started by Rotary in 1965. It has allowed for countless team members of men and women in early stages of their business and professional careers to travel abroad and share their vocational information with representatives of their respective professions in another country. Team members spend 4 weeks abroad studying the host country's institutions, economy, culture, while observing and sharing their professional fields. This year, as Nelson has already told you, our club and 7 other clubs from District 6690 sponsored 6 young professionals in an exchange with Brazil. The Brazilian team will be here in the spring of 2017, just in time for our district conference. It is with great pleasure that I welcome 3 of our GSE team members, Will Fountain, Heather Allender, and Katie Schaefer.
Thank you for having us today. So as was said, there were 6 of us that were a part of the team. Here's our team photo. We traveled this past May. We left on May 2nd and got back the 26th. So it was just over about 3.5 weeks. Just to highlight the various team members, this is Amelia. She was our team leader. She lives in Athens, Ohio. She is currently the president of the Athens Rotary Club. She is employed by Ohio University and is a professor of Spanish there. And she was our official translator for the trip. She had taken about 2 semesters of Portuguese, and being that linguistics is her field, she was able to just dive in and soak up the language and really help to facilitate things with the language there.
Hello, my name is Heather Allender. I live in Marietta, Ohio. I am the immediate past president of the Marietta Noon Club, so I'm very, very happy that June 30 rolled around. I work for the Marietta Community Foundation. I'm the president and CEO there. Just here. Sarah Ott was another team member. Sarah lives in Dublin, Ohio. She is a member of Dublin AM. She works for Washington Township, and she is the administrator there.
Bring it down a little bit more, get on my tippy toes. Hi, I'm Katie Schaefer. I live in Caldwell, Ohio. My sponsoring club was the Zanesville Daybreak Club. I work for Zane State College. I work in our workforce development in training our area businesses. And our final team member was Michelle Richland. She lives in Lancaster, Ohio. She's a member of the Lancaster Noon Club. She works for the after-school program of Lancaster as the executive director. Oh, not final member. I forgot Will hasn't.
She forgot me already. I live in Circleville, Ohio. I am not a Rotarian. I was sponsored by the 2 Circleville clubs, the Sunrise Club and the Noon Club. I currently work at Nationwide Children's Hospital. I've been there 10 years this month and work in pharmaceutical development. Specifically, I'm a quality control manager. So getting into a little bit about where we went and what we did. Here is a map of Brazil. If you can see down in kind of the bottom third, there's a little brown area, and that is the state of Sao Paulo, which is where District 4620 is located. It's basically the central and western portions of the state. The largest city in the district is Sorocaba, which is about 6 million people in the city itself. The greater metropolitan area was about 2 million. So it was a relatively large city. Tiny in comparison to the city of Sao Paulo, which is closer to 20 million people. Most cities in the district were 50 to 150,000 people. They considered those to be extremely small cities and were blown away when we told them about some of the towns that we're from. Circleville's 13,000, Caldwell is under 2,000, and they were just completely shocked by that. Agriculture is their main economy currently. However, education and industry are rapidly growing. The last year and a half, they've been in a big recession, so there's been some leveling off of that, but it's still, the state of Sao Paulo is where the majority of their economic industrial growth has been occurring the last decade. We did a series of social and vocational visits while we were there. They covered such things as schools, industries, farms, hospitals, police, fire, EMS services, pharmacies, foundations, public utilities, government offices. We did a lot of things and saw a lot of different things while we were there. We gave presentations at a total of 9 Rotary meetings and at their district conference. This shows a map of the general area. You can see the city of Sao Paulo all the way over on the right. The stars indicate cities where we stayed for 1 or more days, and the red spots show all the different regions that we visited while we were there. For the most part, we stayed in 3 main areas and did day trips out from each of those areas to visit other clubs, cities, and other activities. So as was mentioned previously, this is a GSC revival. Rotary International stopped the program in about 2013, I believe. Jan Zupnik and some others were talking in 2015 about how great the program was and how they should try and bring it back. They formed a committee. It was called the GSC Revival Committee. Ultimately, the program was funded by a total of 8 clubs, which are all listed up here: Bexley Whitehall, Dublin AM, Dublin Worthington, Columbus, Zanesville Daybreak, Circleville Sunrise, Circleville Noon, and the Marietta clubs. The Brazilian team is inbound in 2017. They're still working out their travel arrangements and when exactly they will be here, but we look forward to seeing them when they come. So at this point in the presentation, we'd like to open it up as just a general Q&A session. We've got a bunch of pictures from our trip that we're just going to run as a slideshow in the background. If anybody has any questions about specific pictures, just holler and we'll stop and look at them.
Yes, sir. Did you stay with host families? And if so, could you tell us what your particular experiences were with your host families?
Yeah, so we stayed in host families in each of the areas that we stayed. Like I said, it was 3 main areas that we stayed in. So we each had, I think, 3 main host families. Is that right? 4 host families. They varied. Some of them were young professionals. Some of them were people that were retired. In general, they were all very good experiences. Some homes there was no English spoken. Some homes there was fluent English spoken. So each place had a different variety of challenges and experiences and all that. Y'all want to come up and add in?
I think the experience I had with my host families was very nice. Actually, Katie and I shared, we were in the same host family for two of the experiences. Yeah. I'd say overall, it's very nice. We were fortunate. All of our host families spoke English.
And spoke English very well. Our first host family was actually an English teacher, and so we had the opportunity to learn Portuguese from an English teacher. So our first 4 or 5 days there, it was a great learning experience for us to be able to get that initial language learning experience with them. So I will say we were pretty lucky, especially with our first host family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes?
Did you have any formalized language instruction as part of your preparation for the trip?
We didn't have anything formal. I personally started learning the language about 2 weeks prior to departure. So, and I believe others kind of looked at some language apps to just get an idea. We were all pretty good on like standard conversation. We could identify our needs, and we had a translator. So that helped also. We all had a translator app on our phone, so that was very helpful. And then we were able to learn from our hosts as well.
I was just going to add, one of the challenges that we found, at least that I found, was that Portuguese is written very similarly to Spanish. And from my Spanish background, just trying to learn Portuguese on my own as an individual, I was really struggling because I'd look at the word and I'd want to pronounce it as if it was Spanish, but in fact, Portuguese pronunciation is radically different than Spanish in many ways. So it was something that we found very difficult to do until we were there and we had somebody that spoke the language that could critique us and walk us through it and correct all of our mistakes.
And we did do our presentations at all the Rotary clubs. We did them all in Portuguese. So they were very impressed with that. We definitely got better as we progressed, but it was very interesting.
I'd like to ask each of you, if you had a highlight of the trip, what would that be, whether it pertained to Rotary or personally or had something to do with your vocation?
My highlight for sure, she asked if we had a highlight of the trip, each of us, whether it was vocation, cultural. My highlight for sure was our visit to the city of Itaé. It was kind of vocational / Rotary. We went to a Rotary meeting for a presentation, but we spent the day with the president of the Rotary Club, and it's just the passion that the Rotary Club had and the city itself had. It was a very small city, very poor city, but the projects, the service projects the Rotary Club took on were just inspiring.
I'll add to that. The club president was a pediatrician, and everybody's heard in the news the problems with the Zika virus. And we were asking them, what are people doing to try and limit the impact of that? And he pointed out that one of his club's projects this year was there's a specific type of flower that attracts dragonflies, and dragonflies eat mosquitoes. So they had a fundraiser. They bought a bunch of these seed packets. Then they passed them out to the teachers in the schools. The teachers used the whole program as an educational opportunity to show kids, ecological life cycles and, all those aspects. Gave the seeds to the kids took them home, taught their parents what they had learned, planted flowers, which will hopefully keep down mosquito populations. So we thought that was a really neat, relatively inexpensive, but potentially high impact program that they had done.
I would say that my highlight was a couple of my vocational visits. We visited a foundation school. It is funded by the area manufacturers, and that's who I work with mostly at my job with the college. So to see that the industry has bought in and is supporting schools for junior high and high school kids, and that these kids are excited to do machining projects and the things that they're actually doing with their hands to build their workforce up at that age was really, really impressive to me, and what I definitely brought back and have kind of tried to put into place a little bit with our manufacturers down in Zanesville and Cambridge.
How did they set up the relationship between what your professions are and who they would set up with you? How they set that up for you? And then corollary question is, what are we doing for the inbounds coming in to have that same kind of relationship so that they can learn more?
Okay, so the question was, how were the vocational visits set up and how are we going to approach it from our side when they come here? How they did it was a little bit behind the scenes for us. We put together information packets on each of ourselves before, 3 months-ish before we went down, about what our careers were, what our educational backgrounds were, what our interests were. For me as a scientist, I knew that I probably wasn't going to find a whole lot of pharmaceutical research in that region. So I listed secondary interests as medical science, health science, agricultural science, other areas that I've had past experience in, or general sciences where I had an interest. That was provided to the clubs down there, and they sorted out various visits. I stayed with a physician in the first city that we were in. He took me to 2 of the hospitals that he works in, those types of things. I know starting here this coming weekend, the local committee is starting to plan the inbound trip, and they will be doing basically the same process, getting information from the inbound team members and working through the local Rotary clubs, sorting out, who has experience in this field or that field, et cetera.
So were you able to meet the inbound team members, or had they been selected yet?
They have not been selected.
And then at the district conference, how many Rotarians were at the district conference, would you say, approximately?
Question was, how many Rotarians were at the district conference? If I had to guess, I would say 250. Y'all think that's more than that? Yeah. I don't know. We didn't do a formal head count. But it was at a hotel kind of out in the middle of the countryside. It was a very big, nice place. They were hosting 2 different conventions, the district conference and another group. But I mean, it was very well attended. We saw a lot of the people that we had seen throughout our time there. It was very close to the end of the trip. It was 5-6 days before we left. So we saw a lot of the people that we had seen in all the various cities again at the district conference. So that was nice to meet up with, friends we had made.
Outside of the Rotarians, how well were you received, and what is the impression of that area towards America?
We visited a lot of schools, and we were rock stars. The children love American culture, and so they were very, very excited to ask us questions about music and TV shows. So the children were very excited. The general public, I think, was excited for our visits and wanting to share information about their schools, their systems, and they were really willing to share information.
Very proud. Yeah, they were very proud of what they've accomplished in the last decade of large economic growth, and we're very excited to showcase their cities, their towns, their businesses, and cultures.
Following that, with the Olympics coming up in Rio, what was the feeling out in those more rural areas, the attitude on the ground of what was going to be happening in their country as a whole?
So the question was, what was their attitude of the upcoming Olympics? And from my viewpoint, a lot of people were they didn't care. They were like, we're in Sao Paulo, that's in Rio, that's a whole nother area. They were kind of impartial to it. We asked, is anybody planning on going to the Olympics? And they're like, no, it's too expensive to travel there, too expensive to get tickets. There wasn't a huge interest in it. But they were very cognizant that they were in the world spotlight, certainly.
I think some of the opinions I heard were a bit more negative about the Olympics coming, and I think while we were there, they actually impeached their president. And so they thought it wasn't a good time to have, a spotlight on Brazil when they're trying to work through some of their, government issues, economic crisis. So that's kind of what I heard.
Yeah, I think I would second what Heather said. We were there at a crazy time. Not only was it a once-in-a-lifetime trip to be there while they actually impeached the president, and just a couple of months before the Olympics, it was definitely the time to be there. And while the Olympics is a big deal, but they all just thought it wasn't the right time for everything to come, and were very worried about Brazil's preparedness for everyone to come, because at the time they were behind in getting the infrastructure and everything like that ready. Mm-hmm.
Did you get a sense for the politics there? I mean, they impeached the lady that was president, mm-hmm. but she was supposedly popular among the population there. Did you get a sense for that part of it?
Okay, he had asked if we got a sense for how popular the president who was impeached, Dilma, and from what I could tell, everyone was thrilled that she was impeached. At least the population that we lived with and the folks that I had spoke with, they were ecstatic about it. Now, I will say the day that we visited Sao Paulo, you could see some remnants of some protests that had happened, the week before. So there were some people that were for it and some that were against it. But for the majority of the people that I had talked with about it, they were glad to see her gone. That's for sure. I don't know if you guys had any.
Yeah, she was originally very popular with the lower half of the middle class, and I think still has some popularity there. But I think for the most part, the people that we were around, she was viewed very, very negatively. I never talked to anybody that was like, well, I could take her or leave her. Everybody was, I hate her, I can't stand her, impeach her, throw her in prison. I mean, there were no wishy-washy feelings. It was pretty one-sided.
But they seem to be a bit more interested about our politics.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions about, our presidential race and, who we liked and, who we were going to vote for. And they're very, very pro-Obama down there. We saw a newspaper article that was direct. It was like an open letter directed to him saying, "We love what you've done in the United States. When you're out of office, we welcome you to come to Brazil and fix our political system." So it was interesting to see.
Three questions, one for each of you. Could you describe the differences between Ohio and Sao Paulo in the areas of healthcare, manufacturing, and the young people's culture?
Okay, difference between Ohio and Sao Paulo in healthcare, manufacturing, and young people's culture. You want to do healthcare?
Yeah, I'll tackle healthcare. Very different. There's very differing grades of healthcare there. So they have a public healthcare system that anybody can walk in off the street and get free healthcare. In most areas, the quality of the care is very poor. Some areas, it's very good. We saw very wide varieties from different towns in terms of the public health care. The private health care, you pay a monthly premium to a hospital or a hospital network, and if you get sick, you can go into any facility in that network and get treatment at no cost, but you're paying a monthly premium for that. Most people that we talked to had paid that monthly premium to get the private health care. The public health care, the first city that we went to a hospital of each. The private was nice, it was new, there was paint on the walls, it wasn't peeling. They had relatively new equipment. The staff were dressed professionally in unstained clothes. Those types of things. We went to the public one, and there were people laying on gurneys in a hall that were told to us were temporary beds. And I said, well, how long does somebody stay in a temporary bed before they get into a room? And they said, it can be 2-3 weeks. So that was really shocking to us. That hospital, their one x-ray machine had broken about a month earlier, and there were no plans to get it fixed. They said, if somebody needs an x-ray, then we have to take them by ambulance to the next town that's an hour away. So it was widely varying, but in one city that we went to, the public and the private were in the same building. They were just different sides of the same building and were similar quality care. And we said, well, why the difference? And what was explained to us was that administrator knew people in government and was able to get more funding for the public facility, and therefore the private facility was very small, and most people didn't even use it because the public facility was so good there. So that kind of showed some of the politics and the, you know, I don't know if it was outright corruption, but definitely knowing people facilitated some regions at the expense of others.
For the manufacturing sector, there were some major differences. One is the importance that was placed in education for manufacturing. The industry definitely supported education for manufacturing, and actually there were separate schools that high schoolers went to in addition to their general education. So a student would go to regular school for 4 hours, they would work in a manufacturing plant for 4 hours, and then they would attend this additional sensei school for 4 hours. So it was a really, really long day for them, but they knew that they would have a good career whenever they finished in a manufacturer. When I would tour the different manufacturing companies, you could tell a big difference between locally owned and internationally owned companies, however, in the safety standards. Some of the companies was very unsafe working conditions, places that we probably shouldn't have been. We were, and you know, shouldn't have been walking, or you know, not quite the safety equipment. But I just, the biggest difference was the importance that they did place on manufacturing, which surprised me.
Okay, so the culture of their youth, as I stated earlier, the youth there were very interested in American culture, TV shows. Actually, a lot of the younger children that we spoke with were learning English through watching Netflix. So there, it was very popular, the music, TV shows, movies. They do have very long days with school. We noticed that often. Oftentimes they had a whole 8 hours for school. I don't know what else you would want to know about youth culture. Yes.
Do they all have cell phones and Pokemon Go?
I don't know. Pokemon Go wasn't popular then. It was in May. I don't even think it came out yet. Yeah, I'm sure they would have. They did all have cell phones, you know, various apps that they always use. And the adults did too. Actually, I would say that the adults were more connected with their cell phones than I see here. They were all always connected. WhatsApp. Yeah, we had to download some apps just so that we can communicate with them on a regular basis. Oh, go ahead.
So I was really surprised at how easy it was to find Wi-Fi. I mean, every restaurant that we went to had Wi-Fi, and they'd have a sign up on the wall that said, you know, ask us for the password. You know, everywhere that we went, we didn't have any problems finding Wi-Fi. So it was easy to stay connected, easier than what we thought it might be. But their, you know, their services weren't as fast as we're used to in the United States in terms of data speeds. But it was very widely available, even in small areas. Yeah, so everybody that went on the program was a Rotarian except for myself and Katie. That was a rule that the GSC Revival Committee changed. They said, you know, hey, if we're going to revive this and we're separate from Rotary International, we're going to make our own rules. I was appreciative of some of the you know, the Rotarians being included, because it gave us as a group a wider understanding of how Rotary works and the types of programs that they do. But my wife's a Rotarian in Circleville, so I had some view of that, you know, outside of the program, and she was also in the GSC program. They went to Argentina in 2009, so I was able to get some ideas of how the program worked when she went, and that kind of stuff.
Being the other non-Rotarian, team member that went on the trip, I would definitely second Will's sentiments in saying that I'm glad that we had some Rotarian members that went with us, because it did give me a better understanding of what Rotary does. Being able to have conversations, with Heather and with the other team members, and gain a better understanding of basically what everything is all about.
Well, I'm certainly glad they allowed Rotarians to go on this trip. I thought it was a great experience. I understand why they want non-Rotarians to go, to introduce them to the world of Rotary and then become members afterwards. But it really was great. As a Rotarian, I was a Rotarian for 4 or 5 years before I went. So I understood that there are various service projects, and I understood how Rotary works and the traditions and the culture of Rotary. So it was very interesting to compare their customs and culture with ours, and learn more about their service projects, possibly ideas that I could take back to my Rotary Club. Yes?
So you've mentioned the longer school day and that sort of thing. Any other day-to-day life differences that stick out for you?
Very long days in general. There were times where we started at 8 a.m. and then didn't get home until 3 a.m. Just because the Rotary meetings. As a president, I know I watch that clock and I ring the bell at 1, otherwise I'm going to get yelled at. Their Rotary meetings just ran on until everyone was done talking with one another, and they decided to leave. Also, Brazilian time.
Yeah, they started at 8 and went to midnight.
Yeah, 8 p.m. to midnight was a Rotary meeting. A
2
typical
minutes. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. See. So it was very laid back, not just with the Rotary meetings, but the culture in general was just very laid back. If we had to be somewhere at 9 a.m., we would usually get there at like 10.
Yeah,
10:30, 11.
Yeah, so we were always late to everything, but the attitude was just so laid back that it was okay. And it was a huge difference from America, where we're hectic and we're always watching the clock and we're speeding to get to places, and we don't just take time to enjoy. So I missed that.
Public and private transportation, what were your experiences, and what brands of vehicles are popular where you were?
I'll start off with the private transportation. The one thing I'll say is their drivers are nuts. Having to rely on riding with our host families all the time, I was scared to death. Their vehicles are much smaller than I'm used to, and their streets are, of course, much smaller than we're used to, and they treat most traffic laws as suggestions. So that was a much different experience than what I'm used to. A lot of the same brands of cars, just different, different models, smaller models most.
They don't have any speed limits really enforced, so they put in speed bumps everywhere. And I'm not talking like a little speed bump, I'm talking like a mountain. So it ends up being a race from speed bump to speed bump. So you go over one, you gun the engine, you get up close to it, you slam on the brakes, you go bouncing over it, and then it's on to the next one that's 30 yards down the road. But yeah, like Katie was saying, a lot of familiar vehicle brands, but different models. I saw a lot from Honda, Chevy, Ford, Toyota, a lot of VWs, then got into Fiats, Peugeot, Renault, some of the brands that we don't see here very often. Very little public transportation, very few trains, period, in Sao Paulo. Most of their freight is moved by truck. We took a subway in the city of Sao Paulo, and that's pretty much the extent of public transportation other than taxis.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot. This meeting is adjourned.